All right, as I mentioned, Logan Paulsen is joining us here, fresh off of his regular season debut. Is that your official debut as the sideline guy, like for anywhere? I mean, in a regular
Yeah,
season
I
game?
guess so. Yeah, I guess so.
Wow, so
Regular season debut. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
so we're all talking about Jaden Daniels and Dan Quinn, and look, we got over here, and you had to do it in the heat. I mean,
It it was warm down there for sure. It really tested my resolve. Thought I was going to catch a cramp, but we fought through it. We made it happen. So
you obviously played the game, so this is probably not a very interesting scenario for you. But as an analyst, does it feel different being down there on the sideline versus whatever watching on TV or being in a box or like when you're in real time watching the game?
yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I think the experience on there is really cool because you get to kind of feel the physicality of it. As you're walking the sideline, you can hear what the coaches are saying. You can kind of get a vibe for the energy of the team, which is really unique. So it's definitely like being like a wallflower down there. You get to see kind of the whole experience in a way that you would never get to see it if you're watching from the stands or at home. So it is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, very, very, very jealous, very jealous. All right, enough flirting. Let's get to the game. I presume you've had a chance now to watch at least a good
Yep.
majority of it back or whatever you do. Just out of curiosity, so every year, like we always talk about, what does a team do to improve? I don't. I mean this seriously. Like you are a guy who really likes watching film. Are you doing anything? Did you do anything different this off season or going into this season? Think, hey, I want to this year incorporate this into my film work or anything that maybe there's new technology out there, whatever. Is there anything you doing different?
Yeah, for me, I think the big one is just trying to make sure I'm more efficient when I'm watching, making sure I'm watching stuff that's important. There's a lot of plays in the game that aren't important. And that's kind of the hard thing about determining what's the critical plays to watch because I want to increase the volume that I'm watching. So, like, this, for example, on Monday, I watched the game, the Commanders game, and then I'm like, start watching the Giants game, and then I have to watch stuff for some of my clients that I consult with around the NFL. And so it's like 6 or 7 hours of film watching. So I just need to make sure that I'm optimizing. And so like I go through I before I watch, I try to make sure I go through the what is that, the game sheet of kind of plays, explosive plays, make sure I touch on those and highlight those. And then kind of first and second downs that aren't good. So I've just tried to streamline that process a little bit. It's not going extremely well so far because like I said, it took me 7 hours on Monday to get through all the film. But that's kind of my objective this year is, and to your point, is like incorporating some analytics in my approach to watching film. So again, I can kind of focus in on certain things like storylines, for example. So, but it's a work in progress for sure.
All right. Well, look, it's only week one, and as we're going to discuss, we're not going to assume that what happened in week one is going to be a harbinger of things to come. I like to believe things will get better. So to
Yeah.
that end, like I think what's interesting to me is the big ass the big mystery for this team going into this game was we don't really quite know what Cliff Kingsbury and Joe Witt were going to unfold. I mean, sure, you can look at their individual histories and say, well, they'll do that, but we don't know. But to some extent, because they were pretty vanilla, obviously in preseason games, and sure, you can see certain things in practice, but you know, like Luke McCaffrey was not getting the second most snaps in practice the way I was seeing it with the first team, and then of course he now gets the second most snaps, things like that. So starting with the offense, I guess. What did you learn? Like what did you learn watching this that maybe you didn't know that Cliff Kingsbury was going to do or how he was going to do it throughout the summer?
Well, the thing is, I'm not sure if we learned anything yet, like definitively. And what I mean by that is like when you look at what Cliff did, I think it fits what they were trying to, what they were expecting from Todd Bowles. So like, they didn't run a ton of motion. They kind of were in these static formations. They tried to go a little bit more tempo, kind of muddle huddle type stuff at the line of scrimmage. And I think we all expected them to do that. But I also think you saw this game plan that was designed to help Jaden identify coverages, identify matchups. And, one of the things you talk to quarterbacks about is some quarterbacks have been very vocal about, they don't like motion because it makes it hard to see the picture. It kind of clouds some of the stuff they're looking at. And so I really felt like the game plan for this week, because of what Todd Bowles presented, was to kind of give simple static pictures based and use formation, use tight ends and running backs to help identify the coverage so that Jaden Daniels could play a fast, efficient football. So I don't know if this is going to be reflective of what we're going to see for the rest of the year. I would expect, like, you were out watching practice. I think it's going to get more complicated. There's going to be more shifts. There's going to be more motions. There's going to be different personnel groupings because we saw that throughout summer. So I would expect to see that as we move forward. But I think, for this week, it kind of fit what Todd Bowles wanted to do. And now, like, I want more data points. I want to see more games, see how he attacks different defenses, see his approach each and every week. And then before I kind of definitively say this is what Cliff's offense is. But I think, for week one, it made sense to me. And so, like, did I learn anything about his offense that we didn't already know? No. I just think this was the style he chose to use in this week one matchup.
Because Kingsbury has a history in the NFL, people they like to point to that and say they understand what a Kingsbury plan is. And a couple things are like, this doesn't seem like motion has historically been a huge part of his deal, and then he
Sure.
typically likes to leave the X receiver on one side, on the left side, and kind of not move it. We did see Terry a couple of times move around. One of the deep throws was with Terry starting off in the slot. And then you mentioned the motion is pretty minimal as a way you think to help Jaden there. So for the people who are screaming, oh no, it's just going to be a repeat of what we've seen before, is there we need to give it a few weeks, right? Maybe a month of the season, and then have a feel for how much he's going to follow his previous script versus, okay, no, like you said, practice things are a little bit different. There's going to be more variance.
Yeah, I mean that's what I would say. I think when I played in the NFL, every team I was on, it took I don't know, 3 to 4 weeks, 4 being generous, 3 being kind of accelerated for the staff to kind of figure out like what we were good at, as a team. Like, oh, they go into the season with a certain expectation. Oh, well, we're going to be an outside zone team. We're going to run this type of play action pass. And you realize, oh, well, the receiver's not really good at running this dig. So why are we going to have him run a dig? Let's have him run a comeback. And then you kind of say, we're going to call more comebacks. We're going to call more blaze outs as opposed to digs. And you just kind of feel the offense out. And so, maybe as they go, Jaden's a little bit more comfortable. He handles the motion a little bit better. You can do some different stuff. So I think it's still so early. I think they're still going to figure stuff out. They've got a lot of really smart people in there with very diverse football backgrounds. Like I think about, Brian Johnson coming from Philly. I'd expect to see more of that Philly run game kind of matriculate in as we go. Obviously the run game coordinator working in San Francisco. I'd expect to see some of that influence pop in. It's just, I think it's hard week one to be super diverse because you don't really know what the other team's going to do and how they're going to line up. And so like that's one thing as an offensive coordinator that you're always kind of negotiating is, like what do I feel comfortable calling based on the defense's reaction? Because you're always anticipating a certain reaction from the defense. And if you don't know what they're going to do to certain motions or know what they're going to do to certain shifts, like sometimes that can be deleterious to your offense. So I understand the approach week one, but I do think that it'll get more complicated and more nuanced as we go. Because I think, again, if you look at 2021, they're not the Miami Dolphins of 2022 in terms of motion and shifts, but they do use those tools quite a bit to kind of find offensive advantages. And I would expect Cliff to do that. And again, like I was really impressed with him in summer. So I'm going to give him a couple weeks, right? And I think that's the other thing is when you look at some of the situations they were in terms of second and long, third and long, and the consistency with which they were in those situations in the game, it really hampers your ability to get into certain elements of your offense. So I think, again, as the offense grows, as they identify what they're good at, what they're bad at, as they become more efficient, I expect to see more complicated stuff.
All right, a couple things. First off, I think I was at a couple of blaze out parties in college. I'm sure UCLA didn't have these things, but I think I recall some of the things. And then you just dropped the word deleterious for kids. That means
Oh yeah,
causing harm or damage. I just had to look that up myself to make sure that the UCLA education just showing there. Wow, that's
popping through. Yeah.
honestly, that's got to be the biggest word any football player not named maybe Steve Young has ever used in analysis. That was quite impressive. Um, Okay, so let's get more specifically to Jaden Daniels debut. Look, if people have insane expectations that he was going to walk on water game one, I mean that's shame on you. That said, what was for you? Just what was the most the best thing you saw? What was the most positive aspects of what he did this week?
I mean, I think obviously the most positive thing that he did was just his athleticism and how like even when he's not seeing it or feeling the coverages extremely well, like you're still in the game. Like you're still able to run an efficient offense. Like even when he's not at his best, like we've seen him in training camp and we've seen him in the preseason, just when he's like locked in, balls out, good timing, good rhythm, trusting your feet, trusting the understanding of the receiver and their depth and the understanding the positions of the defense. We've seen that. But when we're not necessarily feeling that or we're feeling a little bit rushed, man, I mean, I think he scrambled for 6 first downs, right? And some of them were versus completely unblocked pressure. So I think that to me is really encouraging is you have a tremendous floor in this offense just with him at the position. And I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of teams are gravitating towards quarterbacks that can move around a little bit is because it gives you this awesome floor. So I think that's probably the thing I'm most excited about with him is that you can do a lot and you can survive a lot with him. And he does have this great composure about him. And he didn't take any tremendously big shots, which I also like to see. Like he's sliding, he's trying to get down. He's not trying to hit, grand slam home runs every time he runs the football. So all of that stuff around his athleticism, I was excited to see.
Um, yeah, I think fantasy football players know this very well that, if you have a running quarterback, I'm not saying he's a running quarterback, but a quarterback that runs, let's just say, that it raises your floor significantly versus if you're just relying on the quarterback to throw the ball to get his production. And we did see a lot of that. And look, Dan Quinn said it. I think we all probably agree 16 carries is going to be too much
Yeah.
week in, week out. But as he showed in the preseason, he didn't turn the ball over. Now, I guess let me rephrase that. He did technically fumble the ball twice. So let me not pretend that didn't happen. But at the same point, in terms of at least passing the ball, he wasn't putting it up for, into traffic too much. He was pretty conservative in terms of that. And that's something he's shown all year. And I think for a rookie quarterback, that's a big deal. You don't want to put the ball in harm's way no matter who you are, but you can see the rookie get like it feels like to me, I guess, that throwing into traffic can be more concerning than running the ball a little bit, maybe too much in your first game where you're like, and it felt like there were times where there was like any sign of pressure. He just seemed to take off a bit much. And that's something I guess you gotta work on. So that said, he ran the ball all those times. Some of them were designed, some of them weren't. What did you think of his choices there? Was there any pattern as to why he ran as much as he did?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think like when you're scrambling that much, again, I kind of alluded to this already. Like, I don't think he was seeing it, or I don't think he was as confident with some of the spacing as like I thought or expected him to be. And again, it's week one matchup against a very complicated defense. So you get in modes where you're like, am I hot? Do I need to scramble? Is this a window that I can fit the ball into? And I think I'm really grateful for this game for him that it happened week one because I think the film is going to be an excellent learning tool to say like, hey, you got this out here to Terry. I know it's a 5 yard out. I know you're feeling a little bit of pressure, but if you trust your feet, get to the top of your drop and let this thing go, like this DB can't make the play on the ball. Like this is NFL open. And I feel like there was probably, I don't know, on his scrambles, I'd say four of them, five of them kind of fell into that category for me where I'm like, we're too fast with our read. We're trying to get to the second part of this too quick. Let's let the first part develop. Let's get the ball out. And I thought there was a couple opportunities to Terry where I'm like, man, like throw this football, like let it go. And I understand like it's your first game. There's a very steep learning curve. And this is not to say he didn't play well. I think he played fine. I think he played fine. I think there's areas for improvement. And I think that's one area I'd point to is like, hey, we've seen your arm talent. We've seen your quick release. Like you have the skill to make this throw. So let's make this throw. There's another one where they're running like a dig concept. I think I mentioned this on the Take Command podcast with Craig Hoffman and they're in like trail technique right behind the dig. And so a dig is like a 12-yard in cut. And usually with the dagger concept, there's like a quick through coming with it or like a clear out route. And the clear out route is dead like 90% of the time. But if you get two man, which the defensive back is in trail, then throw the football to the seam, right? To the clear out. And there was a perfect example of that to Terry. And, he's looking at it and he just didn't let it rip. And I think and he scrambled for a first down. He scrambled 15 yards, but the other one is a touchdown probably, or an explosive play, more than 60 yards. So those are the types of things that I look at and say, man, if we get you doing and hitting some of these throws in addition to what you showed as a runner, like the sky's the limit. And I think ultimately, like that's one of the things about having this game early is you're going from this game with this very complicated defense that brings a lot of zone pressure, that has unknown rushers, who's dropping out, hard to see coverage structure, to a team next week where you're going to be able to identify a lot of what they do pre-snap. And I think he's going to be way more efficient in this regard. So I think, again, like much like Cliff was kind of trying to cultivate a game plan for a very complicated defense to make it simple for Jaden. I think this complicated defense is going to show him a lot of what he can do and show him a lot of what he missed and lead to a better performance in week two.
It's always fascinating the narratives that come out of a game. Because the passing yards weren't really there, especially not in the first half. There was like some faction out there going, "Oh boy, Kingsbury just way too conservative. He's just having him throw the ball near the line of scrimmage the whole time." But then there's another, it's like, well, as you were just discussing, like, he's just taking off too quick. So I guess I'll just ask you, what was ultimately you think more conservative, Jaden's approach or what Jaden's execution or the actual game plan from Kingsbury?
Yeah, I think it was probably I'm gonna say Jaden's execution. And again, like this is we're kind of splitting hairs here in terms of
Sure.
what's going on. But you missed the deep ball to Terry at the start of the second half, which would have been a huge explosive play. Just talked about the dig that you missed. There was a deep lock route or like a 20-yard curl that I felt like he could have been more aggressive getting the ball to. It ended up being a check down to Austin Eckler, and Austin Eckler was able to run for 30 yards. Great job by him. And again, it's not a bad like he didn't he the thing that I think is hard for fans to kind of hold the duality of this in their mind is that I want to see him make that big time throw because he's capable of doing it and it's part of the progression. His eyes are there, right? And again, because he throws the ball to Eckler doesn't mean that that's a bad play. It just means like, why are you bypassing this first thing to get to the second thing when the first thing's clearly there? There was another thing on the B Rob almost touchdown run where he catches the ball on the shallow cross and runs up the sideline. Like they're running like basically a shade, what I would call a shade concept in Kyle Shanahan's terminology, like a shallow cross and then like a kind of a high over route by Ertz, and then a post to that same side by Terry. And Terry does a great job in quarters at clearing both those guys out. And there's a huge throwing window to Zach. Like that's the number one read. That's where we're starting. Why are we bypassing that so quickly to get to the B Rob thing? And so again, I think he's going to see those opportunities and be like, yeah, I can that ball because that ball is 15 yards down the field. The one to Terry's 20 yards down the field. The other one to Terry's probably 15 to 20 yards down the field. And the other big completions 15 or 20 yards down the field. And I know that's not an incredibly high volume of downfield throws, but when you look at some of the best offenses in the NFL, like they earn those deep throws through a low average depth of target to get those big explosive plays down the field. So I think the narrative is completely different coming out of it if he hits three of those and you're like, wow, like look at how explosive and dynamic this offense is, and look how
Right.
Cliff called this game to kind of insulate him early. So again, could Cliff be more aggressive? Sure. I mean, I think every offensive coordinator kind of battles with that each and every week. But I think if the execution's a little bit better, and not that it was bad, I want to be very clear about that. It just wasn't optimal. And as long as we get something closer to optimal in terms of execution, I don't think we're having this conversation with regards to conservative offense.
Yeah, I mean, I said to my friend, like, yeah, like kind of you said, look, sure, there could be ways they'd be more aggressive, but if that play where Jaden throws to Luke McCaffrey and then Luke looks like he's going to throw the ball back, if that's in your
Yeah.
bag in the first game, I don't think you're being very conservative. Um, by the way, can you explain to me? I must be a dummy. Dan Quinn even joked that I guess Luke doesn't want to be a quarterback because he didn't throw the ball. The
Yeah.
play itself was credited as an 8 yard reception by McCaffrey. How could it be an
Because
8 yard reception and he could throw it back? What am I missing here?
So I think I went back and looked at this and I was kind of thinking through what was happening. So that first throw is it's behind the line of scrimmage. So the next throw can be a lateral. And I think that's what they're looking at there, right? It's like as he ended up catching the ball and then running for 8 yards, which is why it's credited as an 8 yard completion. So he caught the ball behind the line of scrimmage like on a screen. He can lateral that football. And so Jaden, if you watch him, he's getting really deep back there, and they're setting up the offensive lineman in front of him. He could throw that ball back to him as long as it's a lateral. And so I think like that's where it was set up. I think he could have made the throw. He just didn't feel comfortable with it. Probably couldn't see it because like when you're
Well,
looking at it from
yeah,
Luke's perspective, there's offensive linemen running around, who's who, and it's like I'm sure one of the coaching points on that is like if you don't love it, run it. And so if you didn't love it, he's going to run it. He's a receiver. Like that happens all the time. So I understand in terms of the logistics of it, that's why the play would work. However, didn't throw it, not a big play. It didn't end up being an explosive play.
yeah. No, Jaden was like when I did like this, screenshot. Like Jaden is like kind of close to I forget which lineman it was, but kind of close to the lineman
Yeah.
because maybe you don't see him as well. But yeah, I guess because the path went forward, you're right. But it was behind line of scrimmage, but it went forward from Jaden to Luke. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, you can lateral that. And so again, it's all about the setup. And sometimes you'll coach that as a coordinator to make him think, oh, it's a forward pass. But if it's behind the line of scrimmage, we're okay. We can still you can lateral any time, right? And so as long as the second pass is a lateral, we're okay. So I think that's the way I interpreted that play.
All right. And you mentioned already the play where Robinson got a 32-yard catch and Eckler was out there with him. I asked Dan Quinn the other day, is it realistic to think that you guys are going to have to figure out ways to get both of these running backs on the field more together? They were in 21 personnel, only 3 plays this time, which is in line with what Washington was doing last year. That's not crazy. But at the same point, when you look at the other options other than Terry, it just feels like they're going to have to figure out how to get these two guys not just split carries, but like on the field together. Where are you on that notion? Is that just being too, come on, Ben, that's ridiculous? Or is that like, hey, you got to get your best guys on the field one way or the other?
No, I think you got to get your best guys on the field. I think this kind of falls into the bucket of like week one. Like you don't really know what you're going to get. Let's say I get in 21 and they stay in base, right? Like, and we have runs out of that. I don't want to run versus their based offense, right? But if they're going to play base and we have passes up, then we're good to go. So that's again, and as the season progresses and Cliff understands the responses certain teams will have to their personnel, I think you're going to get more diverse stuff because I think that's a great personnel to be in, right? Because who's going to match up? Like, it's all about creating matchups. And I think one of the first interviews I did with Cliff when he got here was like, personnel is a great tool for finding matchups. And so like that's when you bring in a guy like Zach Ertz because he's going to draw Levante David as a matchup. And as good as Levante David is in coverage, I would like that matchup from a receiving standpoint for Zach. And he showed multiple times why that's a good matchup. It's the same thing for Austin and B Rob. If they have to put their outside corners on your receivers, one of those three guys we just mentioned, Zach, Austin, or B Rob, are going to draw a linebacker with a coverage player that's not very good. And so can we isolate them? Can we put them in a position where we can see it and put them on a route that's advantageous to us? So I definitely think you're going to see more of that from a pass game standpoint. In the run game, it gets a little bit wonky in terms of, do you want Austin Eckler blocking a linebacker kind of on lead or B Rob doing the same thing? Or how do we maximize that group? I think there was a really clever play there on that scoring drive where they kind of lined up an offset gun stacked behind each other
Mm-hmm.
and Austin runs hard to the left. It kind of plays like a jet sweep in terms of action to the defense. It pulls the linebackers out, create good angles for the offensive line, ends up being a 6-yard run. So like that type of stuff is great. It's just how do we build that package out and become more creative and not just have like one-off formations. Like what else can we do out of that that's going to help those guys be successful throughout the season? So yeah, I definitely think you're going to see more of that as the season goes on.
And I talked about this over the last couple of weeks, but that, realistically, with looking at the receiver options that they have, the wide receiver options, that this is going to have to be a job for Cliff Kingsbury to be at his tactical best to make this group work. Because other than Terry, there's nobody out there that you go, well, this guy's got to play, all the snaps, or this guy does 3 things particularly well that we can use him a lot. There's a lot of guys who can do like one thing, maybe two, and to have these running backs be a factor. Sure, maybe the passes are a little closer to the line of scrimmage, but maybe that's also going to help open the play up down the field because now all of a sudden, whether it's they're keeping a third linebacker in or dropping the safety to help whatever, that it's stuff like this that like yeah, it may seem I don't know, conservative is the right word, but it may seem a little too small minded in terms of big plays, but it's actually maybe what's going to be best effect to get them the bigger plays because again, individually on talent, they may just don't. I don't know if they have enough.
Yeah, I think it's going to be again. It kind of goes back to that thing I was talking about, like what is an offense good at through the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, and again, then you're going to go through another iteration where you change that one more time. And I think this kind of falls into that bucket for me. I think they got to figure out, to your point, like what's best for this team. Are they maybe they got to get into different personnel groupings and run the ball and then become play action and start looking like more Kyle Shanahan as opposed to Cliff Kingsbury, or maybe they say, hey, we can spread it out with these personnel groupings and when we spread it out, we get really good matchups outside, and we trust Jay and Daniels to make the right decisions. Who knows? But I think all of that decision making process is going to help those receivers be maximized. You know what I mean? Like, what's Noah Brown's role when he's healthy? Like, what's Zacchaeus's optimal role? What's Luke McCaffrey's optimal role? And I don't think that's been really determined yet because obviously that Jahan Dotson trade happens really late in the offseason. And, I think there was a period of time when they were expecting him to be the number 2. And obviously now we're kind of we're not in panic, but we're moving chairs around and moving pieces, and that movement comes with a little bit of uncertainty. So, like as the season goes on over the next couple of games, I think they'll find out, oh, we really like OZ on these couple of routes or blocking in this way. We like Noah Brown in this way. We like Luke McCaffrey in this way. Or maybe we like Jamison Crowder in certain situations. Obviously, got a ball in the game. So I think that's something that'll come as they kind of have a better understanding of, again, what this team and what the receivers specifically can do well and how to maximize that group.
All right, let's pause here for a second. We're going to talk about the defense right after this.
Look
Okay.
at you. Little break.
I don't even know what I'm doing. Okay. By the way, I forgot to say, I purposely brought this coffee cup out for you. I feel like if you were back in the day, you'd have been like
Dude,
an OK Corral kind of a guy.
dude, I love that movie.
I mean, Val Kilmer could take whatever you can point to any Shakespearean actors you want. Top 10 acting performance in any movie ever.
He was excellent in that movie. Excellent. Even what's his name? Kurt Russell's pretty good in that. And what's his name? The brother with the mustache who plays the same guy in every movie.
Sam Elliott.
Like the older, but yeah, he's a beast, dude. Love that guy.
I just on the flight back from Tampa, I couldn't commit to anything new, so I was watching The Big Lebowski for the 800th time. And even in that movie, he just
Yeah.
randomly comes in. It's like he got lost on some other
Yeah.
set. Just randomly comes in and it's being that guy. It's like, well, what's going on here? Um,
Dude,
but-
Big
but-
Lebowski, excellent movie. Anyway, yeah.
oh, so
Excellent.
yeah, we we can do a whole podcast and just talk about movies. I'm down for that. By the way, before actually we get to the defense, I do want to ask you because I haven't talked to you on here about this. The Jahan Dotson trade itself, I think for a lot of people, they were confused. Like, wait a minute, the first round pick, recent first round pick, they don't have, as we're saying, they don't have a ton of receiving talent. But I kind of looked at it as they are trying to set an identity for what they're doing. And he just is a little more, not saying it's right or wrong, but he's just a little more passive in his game. And they want guys who are going to be more aggressive, i.e., like even De'Ami Brown blocking, and they bring in a Noah Brown type. Was that your read ultimately on sort of what happened here? Or do you think there was other reasons why they decided, hey, we're just gonna move on?
Yeah, I think they've been very clear about what they want from everyone on the team in terms of in terms of we want guys that are competitive, tough, urgent, and we're going to take coaching well. And again, like I think Jahan's a really good dude. Talked to him a bunch, like very nice, very articulate, very competitive guy, but I don't think the urgency was there. And I think when you look at the rest of the receiving room, like with Zacchaeus and Luke McCaffrey and De'Ami Brown, and it's a different tempo and a different physicality there. And so if you've identified someone that doesn't necessarily fit your cultural identity, and I think I always look back at what San Francisco was in 2017 and the decisions that they made in 17 to kind of build that roster out. And now they're one of the toughest teams in the NFL. You don't become one of the toughest teams in the NFL by practicing tough. You bring in tough people. And I think that's where kind of maybe the disconnect was for him. And again, not that Jahan's not tough, but he didn't always play with that physicality. And so I think they just said, hey, you're a good football player. We respect what you do, but it's not the right fit for us. And so they moved on from him. And again, like that puts them in a little bit of a situation now. But I think ultimately in the long term, it's going to be advantageous for them because again, they're looking for a certain type of athlete, competitor, and physicality that they felt Jahan was not that. So
Fair enough. All right, let's get to the defense. I joked to somebody. I watched the TV show Big Brother. I'm ashamed to admit it, but it's a fact. And these people are trapped in this fake house for weeks on end, and when they come out, they have no idea. Like like for example, like we're talking the night after the presidential debate. I don't even know. Do they even? I'm not sure. I think they know that Joe Biden dropped out, but they won't know about the debate. Like they don't know about anything. Who got hurt? Anything. If I had been put someone in the Big Brother house the day after the regular season ended, the last regular season ended, and then you just came out and watched this game, you might think, wait, I thought Ron Rivera was getting fired because the defense looked very similar. It was a lot of the same mistakes that we saw before in terms of this inability to the secondary looked out of sync. The pass rush. It was some decent moments, but they couldn't get the sacks. It felt very reminiscent of before, despite the fact that it's all new staff, most of the players, etc. Did you feel any of that deja vu, or for you was it all just coincidence and very different?
No, I didn't feel that really. I think part of it is when you're watching it, when you're watching the film, when you're watching watching all the film last year, that defense and compared to this year, like they were doing stuff more purposefully than this year, I will say. Like you could tell there's a different standard. Like there's a different standard when it comes to pass rush, there's a different standard when it comes to coverage. And again, there were mistakes that were made and it wasn't overly consistent, but like it's different. And I think that's something like much like Jaden Daniels, we talked about some of his inconsistencies in terms of seeing the defense. I feel the same way about the defense on this side of the ball. I think they got a bunch of young guys playing together for the first time. And this is NFL football against a very good Tampa Bay defense offense. Not very good, maybe a little bit strong, but a good Tampa Bay team. And that offense is very complicated, lots of motions and shifts. They're going to test your rules. And this is a tough outing. Like for Mike Sandersville, tough outing. Quan Martin, second-year player, tough outing. Emmanuel Forbes, I'll put in that same bucket. I think he had some different issues, but I think the mental kind of strain that was put on those guys was very, very high. And I look at the way Benjamin St. Juste competed this year in this game, and again, it's one game. And I thought to myself, like, this is a different player. You know what I mean? Just in terms of how physically aggressive he was with one of the maybe best big body receivers in the NFL. And so to me, it's different. Again, they have issues they're going to go through. They have, corrections that need to be made. They have learning experiences that need to be kind of learning journeys that need to be embarked on. But in terms of the comparison, like when you watch the product on the field, it's different. And again, I think as those young players play together more, specifically in the back end, I think you're going to see a much better result and a overall more consistent product. I think that's one thing that I just like kind of is a little bit of a pet peeve for me. It's like this is the first game these guys have played together. Like we don't talk about the preseason, talk about joint practice. It's the first game, and it's different. It's just a different thing, and they're gonna figure it out. I'm very confident. Like hearing some of again, like I mentioned, I was a wallflower on the sideline.
Mhm.
Hearing some of the corrections being made by those defensive backs coaches, I was like, this is different. This is a different thing that this defense is trying to build here, and that's really exciting for me. But again, it's going to take some time to kind of to learn it, I think, and make sure that all these young football players are on the same page.
After the game, I asked Dan Quinn, I said, look, I don't think you're the kind of guy that's going to make excuses. That said, more than half the roster is new. Some of your defensive players didn't play at all in the preseason. The ones that did at most were like, 3 series over 3 games. It seems reasonable to think that it's therefore there's going to be some fits and stops with what's going on in week one. Is that reasonable? He's like, no, I thought we were pretty good in our preparation. He did say, though, however, that he was a little surprised about the energy level, thought there would be more aggressiveness out there. And I think he's primarily talking about the defense, I'm assuming. Um, were you kind of on that aspect? Like, is it reasonable to say, hey, look, they didn't do a lot in the preseason, therefore it's reasonable to think they may be a little bit slower coming out of the gate on defense? Does that seem reasonable?
I've done it both ways. I've never personally done it both ways because I usually play in all the preseason games. But from my experience playing with different
Yeah.
teams, there were teams where the coaches really coddled guys through the preseason, and they came out like absolute maniacs because they were just frothing at the mouth for contact. Like they just were so fresh and so excited for it that they were just like rabid dogs. It's also gone the other way where I've seen guys get coddled a little bit, and it's taken them, 2, 3 games to kind of get their legs under them. So I think based on how they played in the preseason, I would have said they would have come out with the appropriate juice. And that's one thing Dan is always, when I played for him in Atlanta, that was something he always emphasized is just like, where's your energy? Where's your passion for the game and for your teammates? And so again, when you're building a new culture, that's not something that happens overnight. So I think I don't want to put words in his mouth. This is an assumption on my part. I think he just was hoping for more of that because you can always have more of positive energy, right? That's that old football adage, like you control your attitude and your effort. Like those are two things that you have total control over in the game. Everything else is a little bit superfluous. So I think I think that's maybe what he's calling attention to. I didn't think anybody didn't play hard or didn't try their best. I didn't see that, but I definitely understand that perspective from Dan because I think that's something he really emphasizes, and it's probably a little bit frustrating when it's not at 100%.
Well, and I think anybody who has played sports at any level, even if they weren't fortunate enough to play in the NFL like you, like the better you are, the more comfortable you are with what is happening, the more instinctive you become and the less thinking you become. And it definitely looked like in the secondary in particular, a group that was thinking a lot. There was these various breakdowns on a lot of plays. I mean, Baker Mayfield missed a few throws early, otherwise it could have gotten out of hand uh quick. And so I'm in my head, I'm thinking, okay, because I kind of felt what he was saying, but not that they weren't trying, but that there was a lot of overthinking, perhaps. And
Yes,
again, that there was
sure.
the miscommunication. Is that miscommunication in general in the secondary, like you said, these guys the first time they play together, was that part of maybe what was going on?
Yeah, part of it. I mean, one of those in the I think it was the first quarter where they missed that wheel route to number 15
Mhm.
for Tampa Bay. Like they're in empty, so they're trying to check to what appears to be cover two. So you get half the field in cover two, and then the other half didn't get the check. And so obviously you get some guys playing two, some guys playing man. Like that's when the Bullets, I've seen them do that probably 20 times in training camp. It's empty. We're going to check the two. Boom, get out of here. Right. But they didn't, right? They didn't do it. They didn't get it communicated. There's something different about when the Bullets are real and when it's live and when that team on the other side has executed this play, for a couple of years now, because that roster's been together for a while. So
Right.
then there's the other play where they motion to a bunch, and bunches are always really crazy for man rules, right? So, I've got the first guy out, I've got the first guy vertical, I've got the first guy in. And then they run a little bit of a concept, nothing too crazy, but a spot concept where there's a sit and a corner, and it looks like they get confused on who's the first guy in and who's the first guy deep. So that's stuff that's going to get corrected as they go, right? It just is, right? There's defensive back leverages, right? You can tell. I mean, London Fletcher is if you guys have an opportunity, you should definitely listen to the game broadcast because his defensive insight is so spectacular. I feel like I'm learning something every single time around there. But he's talking about defensive back leverages and how they're not playing the correct leverages all the time. And then when I walk by the sideline, I hear coaches yelling leverage. I'm like, man, Fletch must have been onto something there, right? So that's stuff that will get corrected. And I think the thing that's encouraging is last year, there was no talk of leverages in certain situations, right? It was just kind of like go out and good luck, like have fun. And so I do think that there is a path where like this gets better very quickly as the guys get more comfortable with these again, these are novel looks. I think that's the other thing fans need to understand. Like playing defense is all about what you've seen, right? What you've seen and how you adjust to certain things. And so I mean, credit to Tampa Bay, man. They came out with the kitchen sink. They had some very kind of specific game plan runs. They had some very specific game plan concepts that were going to test these rules and man-to-man coverage. And again, like I talked to Fred Smoot about it, and one of the things he always says is like when you play together with a bunch of guys for a long time, like him and Sean Springs, him and Sean Taylor, they played together for a long time. They could just kind of figure stuff out in game. And this group isn't there yet. And it's going to take a couple weeks to get there, maybe even half the season. So I just think that's important to keep in mind. Like they made mistakes, but you kind of expect the mistakes. And I think that's something that's part of the growing process with the defense. I don't think they're bad football players. I think it's just about, again, this is an old thing that Kyle used to say to us all the time. It takes 3 years to learn an offense. And what did he mean by that? It doesn't take 3 years to learn what's in the book. It makes 3 years to learn, like, oh, on this one, I got to be a little bit wider with my splitter. On this run, I got to get back off the ball so I can cut this out. And if I don't do that, I'm not optimizing myself. I think it's probably very similar for defense. It's the stuff that's not on the page that they're still learning at this point.
It's the Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours deal. It's not, yeah,
Yes,
like you said, it's not
100%.
understanding where I have to run. It's understanding the nuances that makes it better, and then to stop thinking and all that. This stuff.
100%.
By the way, I like you're doing really good today. You just named the 2023. You put a caption on the 2023 season. Good luck, have fun. I like that. That's what basically it was all about last year. Okay. One last thing on the defense, and then I want to get to a couple quick things and let you get back to life. The Dan Quinn said that he thought he was pleased with the pass rush, but not with the finishes. Like, if you look at
Yeah.
some of the stats, according to, I think, PFF, Deron Payne had 5 hurries, John Allen had 2, but they didn't have like any quarterback hits, let alone sacks. And this was a lot of what happened last year, it felt like, as well. What did you see? Were you optimistic with what you saw out of the pass rush? And obviously this is very new with the way they're going to bring some guys around, got Luvu in there, all that stuff. Where were you on the pass rush? Because if the pass rush isn't more effective, secondary is going to have a long year.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's something, again, it's there needs to be an urgency to get that better. But what I will say is, like, again, you asked me, oh, does this feel like, is this the same film as 2023? And I can definitively say no, specifically in this category. And what I mean by that is, like, last year the team would get pressures. They get 5 pressures a game or whatever, but they weren't affecting the quarterback type of pressures. They're compressing the pocket, which makes it tough for quarterbacks to scramble and move around, but they're not moving him off the spot. And I was really impressed with the plan from a pass rush standpoint and how they were able to get guys on different angles, on different pass protectors, looping people. And then again, Baker Mayfield's got to move around. He's got to navigate the rush in a way that, I mean, you watched the games last year, Ben. I don't remember seeing that. I remember seeing that maybe 3 times the whole year, and they were all against the Denver Broncos in week 2 or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
it wasn't a very common thing. And so to see that 6 times, 7 times in a game, I'm very encouraged by that. And absolutely, you have to finish. Absolutely. That's why you get paid the big bucks, right? Is to take those pressures and turn them into sacks. Because if you get a sack on 2nd and 10, it's 3rd and 18, you win that down. And we're not even talking about some of these explosive plays. Like, they end drives. They keep points off the board. And so again, I was really impressed. You got to be better. We got to finish. No doubt about it. Got to finish. But in terms of scheme, in terms of the physical execution, I thought it was there in the sense that, like, it's elevating what they're doing on a down to down basis. And that's encouraging to me, because those are 5 pressures that we wouldn't have had last year as a team. And so that's got to grow. That's got to improve 100%. And I emphatically agree with Coach. Finish like 3 of those, and the complexion of this game is totally different, because sacks are explosive plays for the defense, right? They put the offense exactly where they don't want to be. 2nd and long, 3rd and long. The playbook gets to, I'm not kidding you, it gets to about 5 plays in those situations. And if I know those 5 plays, I've seen them, and I understand the weaknesses of my defense, we can defend that and we can get you off the field. So I was really impressed with some of the schematics, some of the physical execution stuff. Great pass rush by Duran, great pass rush by John. Luvu did some good stuff. Bobby Wagner had an excellent blitz where he's collapsing the pocket into the quarterback. Awesome. But let's finish some of those and put us in a good spot to win that football game.
All right. A couple quick fact or fiction questions for you. You can answer them as short or as long as you want. All right. Fact or fiction, despite not playing in the game, Noah Brown is one of their 3 best wide receivers, or needs to be for the rest of the season.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think that is still to be determined. I think people are fans, especially, they go and they say, oh, he's 6'2", he's 215 pounds. He's definitely the number 2 guy. When you watch him in Houston, like, he's a good football player. I think he had 40 receptions for like 500 or 600 yards last year, whatever the number is. Like, OZ did that exact same thing in 2022 in Philly, like almost identical. So there are limitations to what he does, in the same way there's limitations to what OZ does. I think maybe what it gives you is a guy that's got a lot of playing experience that can help you bump OZ into the slot. So from that standpoint, to be one of your top 3, I think it would significantly help this group, but I think it still remains to be seen. He's a guy that didn't play a lot of football last year because of injury, or he played a fair enough, but season shorted because of injury, didn't do the offseason because of injury. So he's got some things to prove to this staff. But in terms of play style, like when you watch him last year in Houston, he's extremely physical. He blocks his face off. He's urgent. He runs routes hard. So he definitely fits the mold. So what I'll say is, true, if for them to be a much improved offense. If he's a top 3 guy and can play that way, it's going to really help this group out for sure.
Yeah, I just look. I mean, look, he got cut by Houston. It's not. Let's not pretend like they were. He's not some all pro. But at the same point, between his size, he's known for his blocking, and that there were at least points last year. Fantasy players remember where he was explosive as a playmaker. That's maybe at least 2 aspects that he can do. Whereas like other guys, it's like it feels like they're sort of limited in like one bucket. And the fact that if they want to run more or have the 2 running backs out there, having a physical presence out there, like Diami is willing to block, but he's not that big. So having a guy like that out there in Noah Brown feels like it could be advantageous for what they want to do, but also to make up for some limits elsewhere. All right, staying at the receiver. Fact or fiction, the coaching staff already sees Luke McCaffrey as the 2nd best receiver behind Terry.
I'm gonna say right now, you're saying, what is it? Today is
Sure.
Thursday, Wednesday.
I mean, he played
I'm
the
gonna say,
second most snaps, just over Diami, but that was slightly surprising to me considering he wasn't being used, as I
right.
recall, with the first team that often in training camp.
I'm gonna say not yet, but it's very, very close. Like, he's not the 2nd best receiver yet on the team, but I do think there is a lot of growth potential for him. And when you watch him, when you watch how he played, when you watch how he runs routes, you're like, this guy could be really impactful here. I'm not saying he's going to have 100 catches, but he might be a guy that ends up surprising us with 40 or 50 catches and is just a super solid, kind of have his very solid to above average rookie season. So I don't think he's there yet, but I think in the next probably, I'd say 3 or 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks, we're looking at him as definitively the number 2 guy. Him, maybe Noah Brown, kind of in that mix together. So
Okay. Fact or fiction, Brandon Coleman should start at left tackle this week.
Yeah, I'm gonna say yeah, I think that's true. I think when you look at I think Cornelius Lucas did a great job in pass protection. I think Cornelius, again, this is one of his limitations as a player. Like he's really good in pass pro. He's a little bit limited as a run blocker. And I think when Brandon Coleman's in there, he gives you a little bit more oomph, a little bit more athleticism to get to the second level to, reach those shades, be a little bit more dynamic. And I think this week might not be a bad week for him to start. Obviously, the pass rushers, I think for the Giants are a little bit, at least on paper, or kind of their reputation is better. But I think their defense is a little bit simpler in terms of the blitzes that they're going to bring, and I think it might not be a bad way to get him in and get his feet wet. But I think he'll, if it's not this week, I definitely think it's in the next 3 weeks that he's going to be starting at left tackle for this team.
This is an add-on to that question. If that's the case, we have not talked much this year about the idea of, okay, well, if Coleman does start, does that mean Lucas should be considered to be at right tackle? It looked to me like Andrew Wiley was giving up some inside pressure a little bit early in the game. Obviously, they didn't give up a ton of pressure in general or sacks, but Tampa Bay was also missing a couple of their key linemen. If Coleman starts at left tackle, would you put Lucas at right or stay with Wiley?
I think Wiley, okay, this is tough because I think fans understand all pressures are not created equal for the offensive line. So he gave up two, I think he gave up four pressures in the game, right? I think two of them, if I might be off, just he gave up three or four.
Yeah.
Two of them, to my eye, were off of stunts. So basically, what they were doing, and they were really well executed by Tampa Bay. They were having like Yaya Diaby or the edge rusher attack the inside shoulder of Wiley, and it looks like an inside move. But basically, what's happening is the guard and the tackle are on different levels because the three technique is looping around. So it looks like that's Wiley's fault, but it's actually like Cosme and Wiley's fault, and they need to make sure that they're on the same level. And it's a little bit hard for both of those guys because of how they were running the stunt. So I just wanted to kind of call attention to that. So I think Wiley's athleticism is very advantageous to this offense. Obviously, if the inside move thing continues to be an issue, Lucas would be a great addition there at left tackle or right tackle, excuse me. But I think the what he brings in the running game from a leverage standpoint, from the ability to bend standpoint, dig people out on double teams to reach the front side defensive end is going to be really advantageous moving forward. Like people sleep on his athleticism, but he's a very kind of twitched up, moves really well type of guy. And I think that's what they're looking for. And I think ultimately that's why Lucas is back to the swing rotation because they're looking for better athletes at those spots.
Okay. Uh, Fact or fiction? Okay, fact. Okay, we talked about the secondary. Fact or fiction? Despite whatever promise may exist with these cornerbacks, they should go out and spend some money to bring in a veteran corner now to help this group.
My question to you would be why? Why would they do that?
Well, I guess then this is, I mean, like if you're optimistic, if they're optimistic the way you sounded to be in terms of like, hey, it's week one, they haven't played together. Let's see. Cool. But on the other hand, for the people like most of us who were watching it without forgetting what happened in last year, it looks like on paper, Emmanuel Forbes is getting picked on again. By the way, I thought Forbes had a really he in terms of growth, he early in the game he really stuck his head in there on a. I don't mean that bad tackling for him, but he really stuck his nose in there on a run play that I don't think he would have done a year ago. So I thought that was a sign of some growth. But I don't know, like
Yeah, so what I would
but like
say is like
Mike Davis didn't play one defensive snap, and that's the guy that they brought in, and everybody else is either young or kind of random. So that's kind of why I'm asking.
yeah, so what I'd say is I mean obviously if the price is right, you do it, but I think the thing that I would just kind of call it like this is I'm going to say retooling year because the rebuild word is something that people are kind of trying to shy away from. It, I don't think anyone's expecting them to go to the Super Bowl this year. So what this would allow us to do is determine who of these young guys we want to want part of the organization moving forward. And obviously, if it gets really bad, like where we can't play defense, then yeah, you got to bring somebody in. But I think this is part of the deal is you are going to get young football players the opportunity to show affirmatively or in the negative that they can do this. And so like part of that is letting them play. And so I don't know if there's an advantage to bringing in a veteran who is not going to be part of the solution long term, at least right now. Like obviously, like I said, if like maybe by week 10, it's like, man, like we can't do defense anymore because of XYZ. yeah, let's bring somebody in and let's make sure we can get an evaluation on the rest of the group. But I think right now I want to know, like I want to know, Forbes, are you part of the solution or are you not part of the solution? Noah Monogany, are you going to be a nickel guy for us moving forward? Like Mike Sanders, are you going to play outside? Like what's going on? So let's let those guys play some football. And like I said, if it gets crazy, we'll make an adjustment. But
You look at you, you're coming for Bram's job. The perfect pronunciation of Noah Igbenogany. I can't do it. That was great. And you basically lead into my last point, and I won't even make it a fact or fiction. But I've been saying for months, and I don't think people want to hear it enough, especially certain fans, which I get, but even honestly, some media people too. They are not, my view has been, they are not, anything they've done has not been about this season. It has been about what they're building. It's why the idea of a Brandon Ayuk trade made zero sense. And
right.
people keep yelling at me that you're not going to give up picks and pay this guy a ton of money for a team that is realistically not being built to win this year. Now, well, I'm not saying they're not tanking. This isn't that. It's just they're playing the long game. That's why they signed a lot of guys to 1 year contracts. They didn't go out and sign guys to big contracts. And yeah, so while I do wonder about maybe adding some corner help, especially if again Mike Davis isn't even going to be a factor, and Noah has never been, this is year 4 or 5 for him, and it's not happened. Um, but yes, this year is about building. It is not about going for it. If it works out, fine. But I think this is the thing that still people are going to struggle to wrap their head around, especially if, God forbid, for fans, they lose to the Giants and start staring 0-6 in the face and being like, "Oh no, what's going on here?"
Yeah, I definitely don't think the team is there. I think this team is going to be an ascending team as the year goes on because like some of these questions that we have now like are going to be answered. Like this guy can't do it, this guy can do it, this guy's doing a better job than we thought. Right. So I don't think they're not tanking, but I do think you got to think of this as like, how do I build the best team? Um, how do I build the best team long term? Because ultimately that's the goal, right? Look, again, I go back to San Francisco because they're the best model of this, right? They were not very good in 17 and 18. Like they were, I think it was a 5-win team. I think they were a 4-win team. They were talking about Kyle Shanahan getting fired, right? It was like, oh no, what's going on? And then in 19 they went to the Super Bowl, right? Like that's kind of the trajectory we're looking for. You got to get an influx of talent, an influx of the right people. And the great thing is I think that they have the quarterback situation worked out. So it's just about now, how do we who is going to be here long term, who's not, and then what do we need to make sure we invest this offseason, whether it's with the draft or through free agency. So I think that's what needs to be looked at. Again, this team is not they're not last year's team. I don't think they're going to go 4-12 or whatever, 4-13. It's a team that I think is they have some questions that need to be answered, and I think that's what they're going to be doing over the next 16 weeks.
Yeah, it's amazing how people forget the past. I mean, not the Troy Aikman Dallas Cowboys. His rookie year, as a starter, he's 0-11. They finished 1-15.
Yeah,
Ironically, the one win was against a really good Washington team. And then a few years later, they're the class of the
they're the
league
team.
for several year. And that nobody wants to go through this, but this is kind of what Dan Quinn was saying the other day. You don't want to go through this, but sometimes this is what you have to do. And I just think people would have a much easier time this season. Not that you want to root for, not that you accept losing, but if you accept where this is, and I do think they're making the right moves, etc., that it'll make this development year feel better. If you're viewing this as, hey, make the playoffs, I think you're going to be disappointed and unfairly so to what they're actually doing. That would be my
Yeah,
basic.
I think for me too, it kind of supports that. It's just like where can this roster grow? How does the quarterback grow? How does Coleman grow? How does Luke McCaffrey grow? Like how does is Jeremy Chin the guy at safety? Is Bobby Wagner still got stuff left in the tank? Like these are the things that you're watching for. And if those are all answered in the affirmative, that's excellent for this team. And that is a win, a definitive win for this organization. And so like I've never been a win-loss guy. I've been all about the process, right? And if they get some of that stuff cleaned up in the back end, if the quarterback starts making some of these throws, like this team's gonna be fine. They're gonna be fine. They might not go to the playoffs this year, but they are definitely setting the stage for something big the following year or the year after that. So again, I don't think they're tanking. I don't think they're trying to lose games. I just think you got to be realistic about where the roster's at, where the young quarterback's at. It's a new quarterback, new coordinator, new defensive. Everything's new. This takes time to kind of flush stuff out, and that's all part of this process of making sure we've got the best Commanders team. A team. I think Josh Harris said it. It's like it's easy to get to 8-8. They
Yeah.
could easily get to 8 this year, 8, right? They'd sign a cornerback, they sign a free agent
They
offensive
did it the
lineman.
last 4 years. I mean, not last year, but they were 4-5 even when they fell apart at the end. Like that, yeah, you can get to
Right.
500. That's not complicated.
But I want to be talking on this podcast with you in 2 years about how they're going to the Super Bowl. Like that's what I want. And that's what fans should also want, I think. And I think that's what every decision they've made so far to me has been the right one. And this is part of those decisions. And I support that 100%.
Look, this is why I keep bringing you back here. And I'm saying this, I'll say this sincerely, not fucking around. Sorry, Bram. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse. Uh,
Bram, get him. Okay.
but Logan is he's on the broadcast. Like it would be easy for him to say everything is sunshine, everything's great. They're playing our. I mean, you got to be realistic about where this is because if you're not, I think you're just setting yourself up for failure in terms of what is actually going to happen. And I think you did that, and that's why Logan. I'm always willing to be your Huckleberry when it comes to
There we go.
discussing the Commanders. All right, the Take Command podcast with Craig Hoffman on the Odyssey app, all that. Obviously, tons of stuff with the team, both in terms of the weekly broadcast, but also on the website, always breaking down this team with Fred Smoot, Santana Moss, and others. Anything else we need to promote
Yeah,
in your busy lifestyle?
just make sure we're checking out that radio call, man. I think London Fletcher and Bram do such a great job on that thing. So if you turn the volume down on your TV, turn the radio up, and let a Washington legend, a Hall of Famer, like guide you on your journey. Because I'm telling you, I know a lot about football, but I learn something every time that man talks. So I definitely think if you are a Washington fan, that's the way you need to be approaching those games now.
All right. I forgot to ask the important question. What SPF level are you wearing on the sidelines now that you're exposed?
It's the highest level that they have available. I'm pretty pasty, Bram. I gotta not
Bram.
Bram, Ben, excuse me.
Wow.
I gotta make sure I'm taking care of my skin. So
Yeah. All right. You rule. I appreciate it. We'll talk. I'll see you out there in Ashburn.
yeah, thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.